Hey everyone, welcome to another CJ and the Duke. As always, I am your host, Robert the Duke Fedoruk.
And I'm Cory, CJ Wesley.
And we are super excited about this episode because we're talking about a topic that keeps on coming up on Cory and I's radar, ID management. And we've got a really special guest for this episode. We got two-time ServiceNow Dev MVP and current VP of Engineering at Clear Skye, Mr. Jarod Mundt. Jarod, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, before we get you talking about what Clear Skye is and why it's so awesome, why don't you give the audience a quick bio so they can see you're one of us. You're a ServiceNow person, just like the rest of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been doing ServiceNow, started out like most people at a customer back in the Berlin, Calgary era. But even before then, I was in the U.S. Air Force for 5 years, worked on a lot of government and military systems, working through securing them, administrating them, and managing teams of people doing the same infrastructure development, variety of things. And then when I found ServiceNow, it all came together. It's the whole org on a single platform.
Now, I introduced the topic as being ID management, but I noticed that Clear Skye sells itself as an ID governance solution, not ID management, ID governance. So what is ID governance?
Yeah, prior to joining Clear Skye, I couldn't have given you a straight answer to this. But what I've learned in the year that I've been at Clear Skye is that the identity industry is very large. And there's some things like password managers, password vaults. There's a lot of different aspects to it. So we are right now focused on IGA, identity governance and administration. And it's a fancy word, but it's probably something that most organizations are already doing, like automating the creation of new accounts when people get onboarded. For existing people, putting something in the service catalog so that they can request additional access to a printer, a file server, web-based application, those sorts of things. And that's the administration part of it. But the other parts are what happens after that service account is created or that admin account is created. Is somebody looking at access quarterly or annually? Does that person still need access, 6 months after the project closed out? So kind of the whole life cycle of all the different accounts and systems within a customer's environment.
That's pretty interesting, especially the life cycle part of that, in terms of looping back around and ensuring that those accounts are accounted for at the end of a project or whenever they're no longer needed. So you guys have obviously created what is a new IGA solution here and addressing some problems that you feel you've seen in the market. Tell me, what were some of those problems that you saw in the IGA market that made you want to go ahead and build a new product? And why are you guys a better take on this than others in the market?
So some of the problems with traditional IGA solutions are, it's very similar to a lot of other systems that ServiceNow is addressing. They're just disjointed. You have to host them yourselves. You have to manage the infrastructure. You need specifically trained people for each unique system. So by putting our IGA app on ServiceNow, you can utilize your existing ServiceNow team to administer it, and you don't have to worry about any of the network security, database backups, and all the other things of building on the ServiceNow platform.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. It's one of the reasons that I love building out on top of ServiceNow actually is that it handles all of that mundane, non-cool, non-app stuff for you, right? Like the security, the data centers, the scale, the database, the communications, notifications, all of that stuff. ServiceNow puts all that in a package for you and just, hey, go nuts and build what you want, right? So that's also one of the reasons that I like building on it.
So, Jarod, I'm going to revisit a couple things. Like, we're now just casually, even on this call, calling it IGA, but I didn't really even know that this was a whole industry with a label on it, basically, before this call. How does somebody know that they are, like, if they have ServiceNow, and just like Cory and I, they're probably dealing with, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we just had the data reconciliation engine ask us if these accounts are still valid? Like the things that we're discovering by accident. How would somebody know that they should have an identity governance administration solution?
At most organizations, you probably are realizing you need a solution when you start getting questions from a chief risk officer, a risk management type of team, or even the network security or CISO type of office.
So you mentioned that most of this seems to be driven by like the CISO function at an organization, and mostly driven by security and risk. I wonder, are you seeing a whole lot of uptake from like the ITSM side of the business, where folks are more focused on automation and kind of making things go vroom versus making sure that things don't leak?
I think our when we're doing customer demos and talking to potential customers, I think it's probably split between just the pure risk, getting a grasp on what we have out in our environment and how they can lower their risk and implement some of these access review best practices. And so I think a majority of what we're selling is reducing risk, knowing what's going on in your environment. And then secondary part of that conversation is the ITSM automation and doing things faster, taking the load off of your service desk or tier 2 teams. So that becomes very clear early on as part of the discussion.
So how do you guys reduce the risk? Since that seems like a huge one of the huge selling points.
Just took the words right out of my mouth, Guy. I mean, everybody on the call can imagine the dollars just adding up on automation, right? Like if I could just get the robots to do this, I could just like the dollar signs, yes. But if I just say, screw it, I don't need an IGA, right? Where are the leaks happening? Like who's sneaking in my back door? Like what is the danger? Whose head's gonna roll?
Yeah,
that's exactly right. And like I mentioned, I've been in the security space for a while. I got CISSP certified back in 2015.
Oh, nice.
And have had Security Plus and all sorts of other, not just Microsoft and Cisco, but have been in the compliance network defense side for a while. And the thing I hate about that industry is when people sell fear. Like if you don't buy our problem, you don't buy this product, you're going to be the next headliner on the newspaper. So, but if you just think back to some of the major headlines that you've seen recently, you want me to name names or just keep it vague?
We probably don't want to name names. We've seen the names.
Yeah, you think back to some of the major headlines of what's happened over it's not even the last 20 years. They're getting more frequent and bigger. And my favorite go-to resource, if you want to read more, there's a thing called the Verizon Data Breach Incident Report, the Verizon DBIR. And that comes out annually, and it gives you kind of the state of the union on what happened. How did these big companies get hacked? Was it because they weren't doing their service patches? Was it because they posted the admin account accidentally on their intranet? Were they socially engineered and they got conned out of letting somebody in a telecom suit get access to their data center? It gives you all numbers on, and consistently year over year, it's misconfigurations and a vendor account or an employee account that had admin that was not deactivated when that person left the organization.
You are breaking 20-year-old me's heart. And you start talking about social engineering and dressing up as a telecom worker and sneaking in. I just envisioned the movie Hackers, and then you cut and you told me that doesn't happen, and it just kind of you broke my heart.
I think he's saying it did happen.
It does happen.
Sweet.
But it's not the number one.
Now people can buy your product.
Yeah, there's some other good, educate your users on phishing type of apps out there. But back on the report, if you want to reduce your risk, there's frameworks out there like the CIS Top 20 or I forget what the federal one is, 8520 something. The frameworks that say just inventory your systems, know who has accounts on your system, patch your systems, review them for misconfigurations regularly. So yeah, if you're just doing all the boring sysadmin things, you're probably not going to be on the paper.
And so
I feel like this is good. This should be a huge aha moment for anybody who's done like an AD integration with ServiceNow orchestration. Because what's the big, we have to do this every single time. We have to make it so we can get the accounts created automatically.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But how many people pay attention? Like we have to check on this every X amount of time to figure out if they still need this access, if they still need this role. That's never how these projects start. And so just go back in your own mind, think of all the times you created an automation to give something, and you've just opened that door forever. Forever.
You know what's funny though, right? Like, is a lot of people consider this when they think of things like VMs, right? There's been a whole lot of publicizing that you want to be able to check on your VMs and see if they've expired, so to speak, and decommission them, because you don't want to use those resources up. So I've seen a lot of lifecycle management around virtual computers and things of that nature, right? But not around accounts typically. There's a couple places I know that do some auditing, but nobody does anything on a more regular basis. So, is that something that How does Clear Sky kind of bring that to the forefront?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's all about provisioning, and the rest of the life cycle is kind of we'll handle that in phase two or phase three, and then that, of course, never gets
Yeah,
prioritized.
yeah, it's no phase
Um,
two.
so yeah,
Biggest myth in
so
implementations.
you've probably seen this. Most of the access reviews that are done is probably around software asset management, trying to reclaim licenses, seeing, hey, this person has a Visio license. Are they still using it? Can I pull that back and issue it to somebody else? But for just regular boring stuff like who's got access to the executive file share or the whatever SharePoint subsite, that sort of stuff isn't costing anybody 10 cents a month or $2, a quarter or something. So it doesn't get prioritized like other things. But
Yeah.
uh,
If I can just interrupt with one more thing. You ever go to like a really old ServiceNow instance or an instance where they've got a third party to do all the instance management for them and just see who's got the ServiceNow admin role?
Yeah.
And like, how many conversations have you had where it's like, you have 30 ServiceNow admins that are active? And how many times have the customer just shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, well, I guess, like, what should we do? Like, and it's just, ServiceNow is traditionally, it hasn't been like a big high status system to breach. But with all the stuff that's going on a ServiceNow systems today, imagine a breach where somebody had ServiceNow admin rights.
Oh God.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And even at orgs that protect prod, they might do a full clone to a subprod and then let 30 people have admin in subprod.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
get access to all the full CMDB, to the
Yep.
whole org chart, to your CEO's phone number. You get really everything.
Like, I'm
Yeah, you're
starting to
right. I
cold
mean, there
sweat
is a
here,
lot
man.
of
I'm like, I feel like calling every client I ever had.
yeah.
Hey,
It's funny. I've had a couple clients though who've taken it seriously, and the data and subprod is scrambled, right? And it's like, oh, that's new, right? Like
Mhm.
it
Yep.
happens a couple of times, but it doesn't happen all the time. I'll tell you what happens all the time though. Right, like I come onto a project right where the instance is already up and running, so it's not a phase one. And I come in and I see and I go and look at who has admin rights and who has admin rights. All of the previous implementers, right? Like going back 3-4 projects deep, they all still have all admin rights. They're all still active. And then they some of my clients in this case would also have IP security, right? Like this is really good, right? They got IP address security, so you can't access the instance unless your IP address is actually provisioned in the instance, right? Like you think they're taking it to the next level, right? Except all these other folks, right, who worked on those previous projects, they still got their IP addresses are still in there and their records are active. So
Yeah.
it's like
And it's not just ServiceNow. Every system in an organization. Think of somebody that's been promoted 5 times, or somebody that's making the rounds and moving to a couple different business units. They're part of different projects. They're part of different teams. Their account just gets added into groups, added into more groups, and then if somebody's been at a company for 12 or 15 years, they probably have way more access than they need to do their job.
absolutely.
So, Jarod, this wasn't on the list of planned questions, but and we don't have a screen, so you can't do a demo. But could you speak generally to like the kinds of tools Clear Skye gives to make all this dangerous, scary stuff we just talked about more manageable?
Definitely. So Clear Skye as a company is right now, I don't know the exact ratio, but we're approximately 50% identity veterans and 50% ServiceNow veterans. So it's not just a few of us, people with the certified app developer cert, just coding away, building some catalog items and some reports. So yeah, we're taking all the requirements from these long-term industry veterans and broke up that whole identity lifecycle into a handful of distinct processes. So of course we have the catalog where your entire organization can browse and say, I want access to this Active Directory system. And then we do dynamic routing for approvals. And if we need to, we can break it up into 5 separate tiers of approvals, depending on the sensitivity of what they're asking for. And everyone listening to this can probably picture all that in their mind, how we fulfill those sort of things. Some of the other lifecycle actions are the provisioning. So we have a connector system. So in the identity and identity governance world, we call them connectors. ServiceNow world, they're usually integrations, or now we're more integration hub spokes, but we call them connectors. And so, yeah, so we have this system to hook into SAP, Active Directory, Azure, all the different systems. We're writing the connectors so that when you click on our store app and install it into Dev, you don't have to go and figure out what the REST path is and what the JSON payload structure is to use it.
Okay.
You can just, I want to do Active Directory. Okay, which mid server do you want to use? What's your service account password? Okay, start importing accounts.
Nice.
Kind of that sort of thing. And the part that I didn't really think much of prior to joining is the access review side, where maybe certain groups are so sensitive, you want to have the access reviewed monthly. Other things are quarterly or annually. And that way, the manager of the group, again, the multi-tiered approval steps, can review and say, who's got access to my team or my division's SharePoint site or Active Directory group that manages our file server or any other system. It could be SAP. I mean, think of all the different business systems. We're currently building connectors into, I don't know how many different popular business systems at the moment.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty cool for you to have those out of the box connectors, right, where people can get started immediately right away, just kind of point click, add a couple of attributes, and boom, we're all set up. I mean, that definitely makes it a lot easier, right, to get engagement. And from my perspective, like with the one of the number one things for any app is to overcome is getting that first view buy-in. I don't know what you'd call it, right? But that's kind of that first, we've bought it, we've installed it, now we can use it, right? And making sure that you actually get it used and engaged.
Yeah, and that's what I like about the ServiceNow store is that getting to that first view is a lot quicker when you're having that build versus buy conversation. And for a lot of different functions within your organization, if you have something that's in the ServiceNow store, whether it's a learning management system, whether it's any sort of bolt-on that really expands the functionality of ServiceNow, you can get to that conversation quicker rather than having a requirements meeting and spending a couple months hiring contractors and building it yourself. You get right to the hands-on approach.
Yeah, you get right to the meat of it, right? Like to the thing that you actually want to do. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the choice to actually build on the ServiceNow platform, right? Like when you choose to build on the ServiceNow platform, you get all that other boring stuff that you don't want to have to deal with for free, right? And you can get right to the interesting stuff of why you're actually building an app to start with. So what made you guys decide whether or not you were going to go with ServiceNow, building a ServiceNow app, or maybe I know some folks have distributed via like update set offline, or even just kind of doing it in a different way altogether?
Yeah, that I don't imagine that there was much of a conversation before I joined about how to distribute the app. Our target customers are large orgs that have real quantity of systems to inventory. So doing a side project doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think they want to see something that's certified and reviewed by ServiceNow themselves. And also, they don't want to have 5 different ways of importing updates. They want to have the store repo and upgrade Clear Skye IGA the same way that they're upgrading security incident response and things like that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about going back on recent clients. Before I joined Vivid Charts, I had somebody who was in that ID management space and they built this brilliant automation tool, but that was a case where they built instead of bought. But now that we know that IGA is its own industry, its own category of problem with incumbent solutions and stuff, you got to wonder, like, what do you miss by building it yourself? Like, to you, this was just a problem, like a single problem, but maybe that problem is way bigger. You know what I mean? And way more nuanced. And why not capitalize on the gains of people who have had this phenomenal expertise in that category before you even realize you had a problem? Sorry, that wasn't even a question. It was just something it came back. But I just it struck me as so profound in that build versus buy. Like, I've always advocated you build when it's a unique to your digital DNA. You buy when it's something everybody's had and you've had like 1,000 people take a crack at solving it and the cream has already risen to the top. Buy that.
Yeah, right. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that.
But okay, so if you guys hold the cream, right? You're the cream of the crop in terms of the IGA knowledge domain. Was there anything about ServiceNow specifically that said, okay, we got to do it on this platform? Forget like OutSystems, forget hand coding it from scratch. Like, what made ServiceNow the platform to do this on?
Oh, and that's an easy one. The build versus buy is definitely an important part of the conversation, but the strength of ServiceNow as an evolving platform is that's where all the data is, right? orgs are making that the authoritative source for the CMDB, for the org chart, for a variety of different data sources. It's the authoritative source on blackout windows, outages on the ITSM side, for risk, your GRC risk registry and other IRM functions there. So that's where we want to be. We want to have our authoritative source of what are the identities, profiles, accounts, the hierarchy, what's the current state of this particular group or whatever. It just needs to be in a table on the ServiceNow platform.
That's a good point too about having access to all the other things that are on the ServiceNow platform already, like having access to the CMDB and things like that. I mean, that's a wealth of information that you can tap into and that you can use to improve the functionality of the product.
Do you find your customer? Sorry, go ahead, Cory.
No, sorry.
Do you find your customers like bumping into the other aspects of the tool, like starting something in Clear Skye because there was some HR event that the HR side of the tool is managing, and then later down the road having some kind of check or audit from the GRC side of the house on data you guys are storing? And if not, do you imagine that being the case years from now?
Most of the orgs we're implementing in right now are already bought in on ServiceNow. That's our ideal customer. We don't train them that ServiceNow is the place to be, or that the future is getting all your executive dashboards and management data in one place. So after an org comes to that realization, for us, it's pretty easy because we connect the dots between the HR, we assist in the onboarding, in the future, when somebody gets a different job title or a different location, we'll do a variety of automated things, right? If you move to the San Diego office, you automatically get access to the San Diego printer, that sort of thing that normally you don't find out until you've been at the office for 3 weeks and you need to print something, and then you realize you don't have access to that particular device.
So tell me then, Jarod, like what are you most excited for at Clear Skye right now and 6 months into the future?
Oh, it's a great time to be here at Clear Skye. It's crazy busy, and we are onboarding quite a few different people. I call it the perpetual hackathon because out in the implementation world, you would do an implementation. Somebody would bring up something, a fun idea, something really cool, and then you would write it down and say, "Oh, let's put that on the parking lot," or "Let's put that on the day 2 sheet." And then in reality, nobody was actually taking notes. That thing would just disappear into the ether. But here at Clear Skye, we have this awesome backlog of features and reworking some of our processes to run in parallel on large node customer instances. So it's kind of fun to be here and see that day 2 and day 3, or phase 2, phase 3 actually come around. And then also working with just crazy smart people, learning about a whole new industry outside of ITSM and DevOps. And then we're getting ready to hop back into conference season, coming out of our combined coma, and get to see each other in person again. So yeah, that's just all the above.
I mean, that's awesome. I love the idea of the hackathon, day 2 projects, just kind of putting some priority on that stuff instead of letting it go out to the parking lot to die, right? Like which is what happens in a lot of cases. So kudos to you guys for actually putting some dedication and some time in and being really intentional about getting through those "wouldn't it be cool if" features, right? I think that's pretty awesome.
All right, folks, we are at time. I'd like to thank again Mr. Jarod Mundt from Clear Skye. If you want to check out Clear Skye, is it clearskye.com?
It is.
Yeah, ClearSkye.com. The link will be in the description of the podcast as well as wherever we post this podcast. So please feel free to check them out and share. Thanks again, Jarod, for coming to the show. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Jarod.